What if I told you that a $15 million Russian radar system, one of the most advanced air defense tools ever built, was fooled by a weather balloon and a second-hand laptop running software that a teenager could download? And the strangest part is not that it worked. It is that the Russian operators spent the next 72 hours chasing a ghost across 3 provinces, convinced they were tracking a North Atlantic Treaty Organization stealth aircraft that was never actually there. It was a quiet Thursday morning in a small rented house on the outskirts of a Ukrainian town, far from the front line. The kitchen smelled of instant coffee. A man named Mark Bilenko, a 34-year-old former telecommunications engineer from Lviv, sat at a wooden table covered with cables, soldering tools, a worn-out notebook, and a laptop that he had purchased secondhand for the equivalent of 220 United States dollars. Next to him on the floor was a folded weather balloon, the same kind that meteorology students use to measure humidity and wind patterns. Mark was not a soldier. He had never worn a uniform in his life, but for the past 4 months, he had been working on something that would eventually be studied by analysts in Washington, in Berlin, and in Tokyo. The problem he was trying to solve was simple to describe and almost impossible to execute. Somewhere on the eastern edge of the conflict zone, a Russian early warning radar installation had been tracking every Ukrainian aircraft, every helicopter, and every large drone that entered a zone of roughly 200 kilometers. And the system was reported to cost around 15 million United States dollars. And according to open-source intelligence reviews, it was capable of detecting objects as small as a commercial quadcopter from a distance of 190 kilometers. Ukrainian commanders had tried to jam it with standard electronic warfare tools. They had tried to blind it with decoys. Nothing worked. The radar was too sensitive, too well defended, and too far away to reach with conventional strikes. Mark had a different idea. He believed the weakness of the system was not in its hardware. It was in its software logic. Modern radars do not simply detect objects, they classify them. A fast-moving target with certain thermal and radar signature properties is labeled as a fighter jet. A slower, larger target is labeled as a bomber. And an extremely slow, high-altitude target with an unusual radar return is labeled as something far more interesting. It is labeled as a possible stealth platform, which is exactly what the operators on the other side had been trained to watch for and report to their superiors immediately. Mark inflated the weather balloon in his backyard on a cold Tuesday at 4 in the morning. Attached to it was a small payload, hand-assembled in that same kitchen over the course of 12 weeks. The payload contained a low-power radio frequency emitter, a tiny metallic reflector pattern made of cut aluminum foil layered at very specific geometric angles, and a single-board computer running open-source software that Mark had modified. The total cost of the entire package, including the balloon, the payload, and the laptop that would control it from the ground, came to a little under 900 United States dollars. The balloon drifted east with the prevailing wind, gaining altitude slowly until it reached around 28 kilometers above the surface. At exactly 5:47 that morning, the Russian radar operators saw something appear on their screens that they had not been trained to ignore. The return was faint, irregular, and moving in a pattern that did not match any known commercial or civilian aircraft. The software running on their console flagged it as a possible low observable aircraft. Within 11 minutes, the information was passed up 3 levels of command. Within 40 minutes, 2 Russian fighter jets were redirected from their original patrol route to investigate the unknown target. Within 3 hours, additional radar stations across 3 provinces were ordered to focus their attention on what the Russian command was now calling an unidentified stealth platform, possibly operated by a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Mark watched it all unfold from his kitchen. The laptop in front of him was connected through a chain of encrypted relays to a small receiver that was picking up fragments of Russian radio traffic. He did not understand all of it, But he understood enough to know that the deception was working far better than anyone on his team had expected. For the next 72 hours, the Russian air defense network was partially blind to real threats because a significant portion of its attention was fixed on something that did not exist. On Ukrainian reconnaissance drones and logistics operations reportedly took advantage of the distraction, although specific details of what was moved during that window have not been confirmed by any official source. When the balloon finally descended, its payload was recovered by a different unit in a different region, and Mark returned to his kitchen, to his coffee, and to the next project on his notebook. The Russian command, according to later reporting by several defense journalists, spent weeks analyzing what had happened. Some officers reportedly believed a real stealth aircraft had been operating in their airspace. Others suspected a sophisticated electronic warfare attack from a foreign power. Almost no one initially suspected that the source of the disruption had been a homemade device launched from a backyard, or built by a man who had never served in the military, using parts that anyone with a credit card and internet access could have ordered. The incident was never officially confirmed by either side. What is known is that shortly afterward, Russian radar units in that region reportedly received updated software intended to filter out unusual target profiles. Similar improvised platforms began appearing in other parts of the conflict zone in the months that followed, each one slightly different, each one slightly harder to detect. The age of billion-dollar systems being challenged by budgets smaller than a used car had quietly begun, and it did not announce itself with an explosion. If this story pulled you in, you should know there are many more like it, operations that never made the front pages, ideas that changed the shape of modern conflict without ever firing a shot. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next analysis. Every week, we go deep into the quiet operations behind the loud headlines, the engineers behind the generals, and the small decisions that reshape large wars. Leave a comment telling us what operation you want covered next, and we will read every single one.